Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Audrey from Audrey Approved. Today I'm going to talk about audiobooks. I am a really big audiobook reader. I think I consume most of my nonfiction via audio format, but in some cases I do listen to fiction as well. And I feel like a really bad narrator will completely ruin a book, and a decent narrator will make the reading experience the same as if you were to, I guess, read it with your eyeballs. But a really good narrator, I think, totally enhances the experience of a book. And so those are the kinds of picks that I want to talk about today. I'm going to start with fiction, and the first up is The Summer That Melted Everything by Tiffany McDaniel, which is I would call it maybe a gothic coming-of-age story set in Ohio during this kind of sweltering summer. And it focuses on a family with two brothers, and the father of this family invites the devil to come to town for the summer through the newspaper. And the devil shows up, and the devil is this young boy. He's a 13-year-old boy, very similar in age to one of the boys within the family. And it's that son of the family that narrates this story, and the story of how his family and his community kind of implode across the sweltering days of this summer. Now, Tiffany McDaniel has such haunting prose. She is a gorgeous writer. I think she's a poet as well, maybe. And the narrator, who is narrating from old age, talking about his experiences back during the events of this summer, is absolutely perfect. It's Mark Bromhall, and his kind of, southern drawl, I think, totally adds to the story. It's an incredibly atmospheric read. This was my favorite fiction book of last year, and I would wholeheartedly recommend it. Next up is a classic. It's The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, narrated by Andy Serkis. And I think there are multiple different narrations of this book, but the Andy Serkis one is absolutely my favorite. Andy Serkis is the actor who played and voiced Gollum from the Peter Jackson films. And, when he approaches, I guess, these audiobooks, he does voices for each of the characters. So if you don't like that, then that's something to note. But I found it so, I guess, familiar because he uses the voices of the actors from the films. So, for example, when Andy Serkis reads the lines from the book that are from Gandalf, he sounds like Ian McKellen. Or when he voices Frodo's lines, he sounds like Elijah Wood. And so, as someone who is a huge fan of the movies, I really liked this. If you're looking for maybe a more unique interpretation of the characters and their voices, maybe you'd like one of the other narrators of these books. But Andy Serkis has done the entire trilogy. He's done The Hobbit, and he's recently come out with The Silmarillion, which is on my TBR. I already own that audiobook, and I'm very eager to get to it soon. But this is a fantastic and I think very accessible way to read this fantasy classic. I also want to highlight a recent read, which is Lamb by Christopher Moore and narrated by Fisher Stevens. And this is very much a piece of humor. It's a piece of satire, and it's written from the perspective of this man called Biff, who is the best friend of Jesus Christ. And it's written as a gospel, or I guess a new gospel from Biff, as he kind of accounts his experiences growing up with Jesus. And I just feel like the narration here, in particular, I guess, the delivery and the tone, make it very obvious that it's a satire and it's very humorous, and I found it just really entertaining. I laughed a lot listening to this audiobook. It's one of my favorite, I guess, humorous books that I've come across in the past few years. And so if you're looking for something that's funny and I guess more lighthearted, and you don't mind it having a bit of a religious bent, then you might enjoy this one as well. And then I also want to highlight, I guess, some mythology retellings that are narrated by the same people that, I don't know if wrote is the right word, but I guess compiled the stories. And the first is Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. I'd never read anything that covered Norse mythology before this, so I really enjoyed this introduction. And then the second one are, I guess, the multitude of books that Stephen Fry has come out with. I think I've read Heroes and Mythos, and then I'm eagerly awaiting the release of the Odyssey. And I just feel like both Stephen Fry and Neil Gaiman, they do a lot of narration, especially of popular works, and they're both just really experienced and really good narrators. And I thought they brought, the characters of these myths to life. I just really enjoyed my time with both of those. For nonfiction, I want to highlight Say Nothing by Patrick Radden Keefe, which is a story about the Troubles. Is a piece of narrative nonfiction. It's very well loved on this community, and it's a wonderfully layered story that talks about violence and the legacy of violence and the justification of violence, and how our interpretation and how we view those things changes with time and with memory. And a beautiful book like this, I think, is only enhanced by a narrator who helps bring the reader into the story that's happening. And in particular, this narrator, who is I think Matthew Blaney, he's a Belfast native. In particular, it's just his accent, I think, made it incredibly immersive. And I think the combination of well-delivered narration with the kind of atmosphere of his accent and the wonderful writing of Patrick Radden Keefe made this a totally engrossing read. For the rest of the nonfiction recommendations, I have books that are narrated by the authors themselves, their memoirs. And I think this is, the most kind of recommended type of book in videos like this, because there is just something special about listening to someone's own experiences in their own voice. And so the very first book that I think I ever listened to in audiobook format was Kitchen Confidential: Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly by Anthony Bourdain, which I think everybody recommends in videos like this. And if you watched No Reservations or any of Anthony Bourdain's shows, you know that he narrates and he writes for those TV shows. And so the voice and the style and the cadence of the prose in this memoir brings you right back to those shows. And so especially after his death, I just found it a really powerful read. I also want to highlight David Sedaris, who, if you're going to read his books, I think the only way to read them is in audiobook format. He is a humorist, I guess, and an essayist, and he writes about just normal stuff. He writes about like his relationship, his husband, his family, observations that he has. And on paper, like on description, this isn't something that I would normally pick up, because I would just be like, what is the takeaway of this? But they're all so funny and so insightful. And after reading my first David Sedaris book, I quickly, I think, blazed through, 5 or 6 of his other books. And so if you're going to pick up David Sedaris, definitely do it via audiobook. I also want to highlight All the Beauty in the World by Patrick Bringley, which is actually my most recent 5-star read. I finished it a few weeks ago. And this is a beautiful memoir written by a man who used to be a guard at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Manhattan. And he joined, I guess, the guard force very, very soon after the death of his brother. And this is kind of his reflection on his 10 years working at the Met and what he learned. It's a combination of, I guess, just love for art. It's an appreciation of simplicity. He focuses a lot on the beauty in the mundane. And I don't think this will be for everybody, because it's slow and it's a little bit meandering, but Patrick Bringley is so emotional in his delivery when he talks about not only the death of his brother, but also just how much he loves certain pieces of art within the museum. And I just thought it was beautiful. It brought me to tears. It was the only book this year to make me cry. And I think it's definitely worth checking out if you enjoy art, if you've ever been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or if you're looking for books about grief. And then lastly, I want to highlight Crying in Age of Art by Michelle Zauner, which, similar to All the Beauty in the World, is about losing a loved one. It's a memoir from the author as she accounts her experiences growing up Asian American. She's Korean American, and her experiences losing her mother to cancer. And again, it's just some very honest and beautiful writing, but also combined with the audiobook, there's really this sense of vulnerability and emotion that I just found incredibly powerful. So if you haven't read this, if you're one of the few people that haven't read this, I do recommend it in audiobook format. Hopefully I've convinced you to check out maybe one of these audiobooks in order to kind of get maybe a more unique reading experience rather than consuming them in print or an ebook. But let me know what your favorite audiobook is, and I'll see you next time. Bye.